the topic today is how should the United States source its energy? And so I was thinking about just opening up broadly, and we could go into more specifics here in a minute, but what opinions do you guys have? Like, do you think the United States should use a mix? Should it try to move towards renewables? Should it just be like, already saying with how it is right now, which is like mostly petroleum and natural gas? What do you guys think?
The first thing I looked at is I kind of looked at what are all the different sources of energy that the U.S. uses. And I've currently got 6 main types with a lot of different subcategories under that. Every single one has pros and cons, and a lot of the cons for half of these were location and general like conditions of how they will be used, such as solar, if it's a cloudy or dark day. It's going to be powerful wind. You can only use in certain locations where there's high concentrations of wind. Hydro can obviously only be used in big rivers and oceans. Some areas that are very dry or without water are obviously very limited. And then other ones have problems with the ones that are very dangerous. So when I was looking at everything, it kind of made me think there's not one that we can sit on because there's too many cons with just how we want.
So without putting all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, I was thinking about later in this, we can go down like each one and like talk about the pros and cons and like what we each think and maybe like what percentage of the mix that could be, if you guys are agreeing with the mixes we're on and so on. What do you think?
Well, it also just kind of depends too, like, is it gonna, if we just stick to one, is it gonna like bring us more into debt than what we already are as a country, or like will it actually like leave like less debt and actually be like profitable for us?
Yeah.
A lot of the energy has their pros and cons. Some are better than others, obviously, but it doesn't work out for the whole United States. So yeah, we have to have a mixture of some sort.
Cool. Well, do we want to like start getting into different individuals, like fossil fuels, for instance, oil, so petroleum, and like how we get that? So I know that the United States has produced a lot recently as well, but in the past it also has caused problems internationally, like in the 70s with Iran and OPEC. We like they cut us off from our oil, and so that really messed up the prices, and it caused like a mini recession. So what do you guys think about fossil fuels and how the United States should like work with them?
I think fossil fuels is definitely a smart way to go, but I think the cons that I think the pros that it has is it's not a location-based or weather-based system such as hydro and wind or solar. So I think that pro is definitely something that we would have to look towards because the U.S. is so huge. The East Coast is completely different from the West Coast, which is completely different from the middle. And so if we're gonna just stick to one, finding one that would fit all those, and I know that fossil fuels fits that the best, but as the modern general value and morale of how the like outlook of how life should look, a lot of people are looking at air pollution and as well as general quality of how our energy is produced. And in those terms, it comes that you can't just pick one because of that factor of obviously nuclear, burning the fuels and stuff is never a good option for that case. So, yeah.
And then also, it's like a lot of machinery either does like gas or oil in order to function. So if we just stick to one, then a lot of like machinery, especially managers and farmers and like construction, they won't be able to use their like equipment to like create buildings and give it produce.
You shouldn't be reliant on other countries, and we should provide like whatever natural resources we have. We should use them before we start using different countries. So yeah, fossil fuels here in the United States.
Nice. I was just thinking because we have such a small group that if any of you guys want to chip in at the end of like each of these segments, like right now we're finishing up on petroleum, so if you guys have any opinions, I think we'd love to hear them. So, love and hate for petroleum?
Petroleum has always been a great option for, especially in agriculture, because as somebody that runs really old farm equipment at home, none of the electronics work in anything. They try and switch us over to electricity for that, it's all going to fall apart real quick. It's dirt and electricity do not get along.
And then also with like the electricity, like second being act as a buffer, so it's like you can't go to that.
move on to natural gas. It sounds like we're moving on to natural gas, so, I don't know if you guys know much about it, but essentially the United States has a very, very large amount of it, particularly in the Midwest, and, how you get that is fracking. So, that's a really controversial, topic. Especially in the United States, because it really like messes up the earth sometimes, but anyways, what do you guys think of natural gas as another way to fuel the United States economy? Also, I think it's like 28% of our fuel right now, so.
Well, a lot of people would, like, with the natural gas, since it is mostly of, like, carbon, it'll kind of consider it like, oh, global warming will be a lot worse, it'll affect, like, a lot of ecosystems because of that. So, I don't know, for me personally, I wouldn't think just natural gas would be the one thing. It has to be, like you mentioned before, it has to be a whole mixture of,
Yeah. Do you think it should take a big or a large part in the mix though? Because right now it takes a very large part, it's over a quarter of the energy. Should it be less, should it be more?
I would say less, because I think three key, like, aspects of that, I think, the U.S. energy sources have is powerful enough to increase revenue the U.S. constantly has. Must be renewable and must fit the moral values of the average citizen. And for me, that one just, I think the average citizen is a lot less desirable, for most people. So I think when it comes to having to use a mix of things, I think that would have to start slowly being moved off into a lower percentage. Areas that maybe can't get high land or tidal power or anything like that, where their only option is that. As you get closer to the big cities that are along the coastline, trying to find solar or definitely more tidal to the ocean to power them, because power can also be a very powerful source, which has a lot at one single time as well. The cities along big rivers as well. That way they can kind of stop using that as much as it's not polluting the air as much, and then hopefully to the ocean.
Yeah, I agree. The emissions, yes, relying on natural gas, but it would be nice to, like, lean off of it, but specifically right now, probably not that option.
Anyone from the audience have anything to say on natural gas? Yeah, no, from what I can kind of tell, it seems like you guys have a more negative opinion on natural gas than petroleum, which I find kind of interesting. They're obviously like in the same basket. So is there a reason for that, you guys think, or?
Not necessarily, which is really fun. Like, there's definitely someone who's
Yeah.
well, also with all of the energy, depending on how they use, it can even be beneficial or really separate, partners for it, but in the future.
Yeah. So going along that, let's talk about coal, which could possibly be the most divisive of these three main fossil fuels. So what are your guys' opinions on coal?
How often do we use it, though?
We actually use coal a lot. It's actually 12%. We just don't really see that much on the West Coast because we don't really have that. So it's a really big thing to discuss.
And is that something that we're slowly getting lower levels on as doing before?
Actually, it's pretty fast. Coal use is like the majority, or at least the plurality of how the United States fueled itself, and it's been dropping very quickly. So, yeah, so the mix, I think it's like 12% now, which I think it used to just be like 30 years ago, like 45.
One of the reasons it's using it because they don't use it, so if you use it, it's completely gone.
And I think that again was kind of the key factors as well, to make a reliable source is not necessarily. Kind of something that's close to first to is called biomass. Where organic materials, crops, plants, trees, animal waste, actually turn into fuel and gas, but they use that fuel and gas to run steam powered engines. Those engines are what's creating the power. That to me is a much healthier way to do this kind of thing, because not only are you getting crops, plants, trees, and animal waste stuff that is easy to burn, it's easy to produce, and in a sense could actually be more jobs of people producing those kind of things to burn, but it's also a way to burn around the good.
Another pro with it too is it's a lot lot more money in the ag, or like into ag. So a lot of farmers, like the byproduct that they have, like they'll sell that. I mean, it will be not like the majority of the money, but it will be like a substantial paycheck. And it helps them out a lot.
I'd say the only con that I really had with it was just the work. I think the average guy doesn't really care about what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're talking about coal, and it's a little bit, like, it's not everywhere, you have to go to get it. So for example, like, I'm from this area, but my brother does a lot of metal work, and he has a coal used forge, to do that. And so, like, we'll have to travel over to go get that coal. But it's also, you know, it's just like, it is just kind of,
Yeah.
information on it. But burning it isn't necessarily the greatest for here. So coal is great in the air, but it's also, like you said, once you burn it, it's gone. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely. It is probably, I think, from what I saw, it is definitely like the dirtiest, like, most pollution heavy source of deep freeze.
Well, even when it comes to terms of obtaining that coal as well, it's very dirty. Even does the job.
Well, and then if you like naturally, like, how coal is created, it takes like millions of years to form, so it's not really, oh, it's still,
It's not something we can match.
yeah.
Good, ready to move on to nuclear? Go to Springfield and visit the system. Mr. Burns, right? Yeah, nuclear energy, it's actually pretty clean. However, to go with that, it's pretty dangerous and it's pretty expensive too, at least at first, in the long run, though it does get cheaper. But it is not renewable technically, but it doesn't burn that much fuel, so it lasts longer than something like oil or coal. So what do you guys think?
My pros I have with it is extremely powerful. That said, it's very reliable as in renewable. Obviously, it's not 100% renewable, but like you said, it does last a long time. But for me, the cons really outweigh the one, because it's extremely dangerous. It's basically a bomb waiting to happen if something goes wrong, and then and it's just completely unsafe for not only workers, people near it, and all the aspects of it is just kind of it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't get rid of it, like, professionally, how it's supposed to make it just be like mass destruction.
And it'd be a hard one for you to rely on for a complete energy source, because now you're talking about having to build more to fit the constantly growing amount of people that we have, as well as all the locations we have. This one I could go in any location, but we currently don't have any location to get that going would be a long one.
So it was actually pretty interesting when I was looking at nuclear is 9%, so it's rivaling coal right now for how much energy is actually put into the like infrastructure with it. So I thought that pretty interesting. So I mean, yeah, there's not only like the tragedies like Chernobyl over there in Ukraine, but like we had 3 Mile Island here in Pennsylvania, and like that was just crazy too. Like that was big, although I don't think there was that as much destruction versus Chernobyl. So yeah. Do you have any opinions on nuclear?
I would be here on the less comments.
And compared to the other options that are on the table, I think nuclear is just a lot more easier how they consider it, even though it's very viable.
Well, and then also, it's like, we leave it as being the main energy source, other people may get like a wrong idea about it, and could use it for like as weapons instead of actually like energy.
Yeah. So 9% right now. Would you guys want to go higher, lower, or stay at that range?
Yeah, lower.
Lower or keep it the same so we don't have to miss trying to shut anything down and things going wrong?
Because I think California is actually the majority of that, from what I can see, or at least cool. So now moving on to renewable energies. So let's start off with wind, and then there's also offshore wind. So Oregon's a really big producer of wood. Areas like Condon and Arlington here in the United States that are very popular and have a lot of wind turbines. So what do you guys think?
Personally, personally, I don't like it because, like, after 24 years, like, there's a whole issue in Casper, Wyoming, where they just toss them, the lights on the windmill, and they don't recycle, and it just takes a lot, and they're ginormous. If you've seen them, I'm like, So, yeah, so it's not very good.
Do you think wind would be a reliable resource if they found a way to make those blades more recyclable or find a way to maybe even use them in a way?
Yes, I think that would be great, but so far it's not.
Do you know why they're not recycling it? Is it just like, oh, it's cheaper to throw it away, or is it like they're not recyclable?
Okay, they're not recyclable whatsoever, but I looked and like it costs $30,000 to repair it and like $250,000 to get a new one. I'm like, that's really weird, maybe the set was wrong, but I'm like, why don't you just repair it? But it takes a lot of people and then a lot of time and energy and everything, so.
Well, honestly, it's like how we've gone to the future. I feel like the easiest way is the best way. So like most of us, or like now, like the newer generation that's like growing, they find it that if they don't really work as hard, it's just easier to like go on with life than how maybe our parents are like, oh, if we work hard, we'll get like better and just find better things to do. So I feel like with that going, it's just like, oh, it's trash, just someday and buy something new instead of actually repair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that it's a very quick source of power. I know just a short amount of time on those things generates a massive amount of power. And it's very high access as well. But it's very weather dependent for the most part, as well as just the general location where you can handle it.
Yeah.
There's some areas that basically get zero throughout the year. So you have a lot of dark spots around across the US, but again, I think I would have to look at some sort of mix, some sort of energy sources, because just having to rely on that wouldn't work.
Yeah. I think another thing with that too is, the vast majority of where we could actually put wind is in areas that actually have really low population, so it's moving the energy that creates somewhere, and is that efficient? So like, say, having it somewhere like in Wyoming, like how you were mentioning Casper, I mean, moving it to a larger population area like Seattle, California, how expensive and inefficient is that gonna be? Like, are you gonna lose 10% of the energy, 20%, 30%, 9%? Like, what is that?
Well, it's not exactly also depending on where you put it, like in a major city like Seattle, California, doesn't mean also getting rid of like agriculture, like steel, that's are using, or does it mean taking out people, like from where they're living, to make that equipment?
Yeah. You can say like, right, you change a lot of people's lives, yeah. Yeah.
So you guys talked a little, and you're just talking a little bit about agriculture aspect of it, but if you have all these windmills and they are typically more in rural areas, but it's still being transferred to somewhere else, I feel like how does that affect the people, how are people more likely or less likely to accept having windmills put in if they know it's not going to even benefit them as much, or it's not going to put in?
Yeah, because we also gotta think of like, we placed one windmill, how far of electricity will it take? So like maybe like a 50-mile range, or will it be like 100-mile range? So just like one windmill, and then if you go from there, it's like, oh, it's a 50-mile range, right? Let's set maybe 10 windmills. How far would that be?
Yeah.
And then that again is just like, it's just a location issue. Different things are gonna have different sources, but your city's not gonna rely on soccer, but a rural area is not gonna rely on soccer.
Yeah. Anything else about wind from the audience?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've heard a lot that it's very pretty hard on wildlife such as birds. Is that a very high decibel from them, or have you guys looked into that?
I have heard of that before, where I know like, and within like a certain radius, and even national parks or state parks, they actually don't allow windmills for that exact reason. Because even from a certain mile radius, it affects the whole population of different species. That's the point, because it's like the sound that they produce as well, for some animals, be like,
Yeah. And then anything else on wind? So, yeah, what about solar?
So it's kind of similar to windmills, it's like how much would one solar panel range, and depending on like, if you like 50 mile or the 100 mile range, that's the kind of, that, and then would it benefit also like people living in the rural or just like really high population areas?
I don't know. I feel like it's be very similar to solar as wind, just different areas. I feel like a lot of areas like Nevada, Arizona, Mexico, like those rural areas, that's where they put them. And then how would you be able to move them to larger population areas?
I think the only problem that's really occurring with solar is it's very expensive, some to produce, as well as after a while, when panels do start to deteriorate, a lot like the ones are not very recyclable for the most part. There are certain pieces of them that aren't very recyclable. So then again, we run the lasting issue as well. So thus finding a way to get them recycled or reused, to make them beneficial, I think solve that problem, but then also looking at, they're kind of used to some cloudy days, so even if you just have a rainy day, their charge time is very slow. So if you have a week-long rain schedule, after that week, it's going to take us all 2-3 days to get really anything back up to full power, unless you have an overabundance of them. But for a place that's a lot poorer of a community, it's going to be a lot harder for them to find more solar panels to be able to produce that power. So it's definitely like would work better for bigger cities, possibly. But then you got cities like Seattle where it's always raining, or you got places like the Valley here in Oregon where it's always pretty cloudy, where it's pretty rainy. And even like here, it's not been very sunny lately. So,
That's kind of it. There's another thing with solar too is I know the European Union went to like the northern African countries like Libya, Algeria, and we're like, hey, we're going to put a ton of solar panels on your guys' land, and then we're going to do like a big pipe that are poured essentially over to like Italy and then go to the continent. They're like, this is how we're going to like produce a lot of power. And that happened, and then after a couple of years, they like looked at it, and the temperatures are like skyrocketed in the areas where they have solar panels, and so they like hold on and off and they're like, we can't do this because they'll like change the temperatures. So.
Yeah. Well, also, you kind of think about it, the reason they put across the high temperatures is like, if you look at a solar panel, they're mostly like flexed out. So like absorb the energy, and so it's like creating a lot of heat. Then the black color doesn't really reflect right, and like so it just absorbs all the heat, making it a lot hotter.
I know it's also pretty bad for wildlife too, just because of that very thing though. Like, if it like kills grass below and whatnot, it like covers a lot of ground, I mean, it produces a lot of sunlight. You guys think, yeah?
I've always thought wind and solar are best done on a smaller scale. They seem like something that can't be scaled up to a big enough level to make them a major player. Really, it always seems like, well, here's some extra, but it's not gonna overwhelm the other ones.
Yeah.
I think solar could be put into a place like Portland, but it would not be able to handle on its own. A city like Seattle, LA, would not be able to handle just solar alone. Just for that same reason. If you have a rainy week and then that many solar panels that just aren't going to be able to produce that much electricity, just altogether.
What about a city like Phoenix? Like, so very sunny, middle of Arizona, like only a couple rain days a year last. What about something like that? Would that be a good option? To like maybe have a big fire in that city?
But like how you can just imagine with that is an express solar or decrease the temperatures a lot, and they get a lot hotter.
Yeah.
And is that desirable for the cities that are
Yeah. I was just gonna say, go back on that statement, I mean, like, these were like really big areas of solar panels, so maybe that's why it was like so quickly affecting the maybe it would be different at a smaller scale in cities, but yeah. Anything else on solar?
So I worked with someone over summer, and he says his house is like, he has like solar panels on it, for electricity, and he said, like, he doesn't have to pay electricity, and I don't know how it works exactly, but like, they're big heat for having them.
Yeah.
And so in the long run, like, if you're looking at just like your own personal house, it might like be cheaper for you, but I don't know how it is for like, this is like,
Yeah.
for this one, but like, it is cheaper in the long run.
I think solar panels probably sound like they'd be a better for a personal use type thing, you know, for a house, or for a personal workshop or something. But then a lot of what we were saying for a big city or for business or for a factory issue, that would really be something.
Especially with how much energy.
This seems like more like solar panels or solar energy is a better use if we can get more people to jump in on that and participate or like partake in that, versus trying to just get one big organization and put a big ton of solar panels in one area. So it's more about like increasing more people and promoting that for individuals.
Kind of a more bottom and top approach. That's interesting. Like that. So moving on to geothermal energy, essentially just extracting heat from like the earth and using that to create energy. So what do you guys think about that? Or do you guys think about it? I feel like this one's talked about a lot less.
Yeah, I didn't get a whole lot of geothermal, but I grew up in Bend, Oregon, where there's so much wind water down and all around. So geothermal is actually pretty commonly in that area, more so on the west side of town. And it was something that, over time, is not a very reliable source. Because over time, not every single pocket of that kind of stuff lasts. Sometimes they just kind of tend to get away. And so that again would be a very location mattering issue. There's only some areas in the U.S. that have not a whole lot of hot springs, not a whole lot of geysers, a whole lot of nearby volcanoes that have underneath magma and stuff going around. So thermal is like, I think, a very good powerful source, but to an extent within certain areas. I mean, even in central Oregon, you get towards Redmond, you're already starting to lose that thermal power that you have in Denver.
Well, and also we gotta just like how will it affect the environment a little bit less like that too. Not just like.
That is for geothermal?
I don't know that much, so.
I don't know how much either. So going back to what Ryan was talking about earlier, biomass, where you're essentially cooking up agricultural byproducts and use that to create power.
From all the ones we've looked at, I feel like this is the most location-wide and easily accessible source for sure. Especially because those products are something that are very easily that can be shipped by train, by truck, by freight. And so even just a farmer selling manure loads it into a dump trailer and hauling it 100 miles away towards the city or anything like that. I think the biggest issue is building all the kind of factories and areas that would burn this product to generate that power, especially for the bigger cities. They would need a lot of it. I think it definitely would be great for agriculture and that general business. I think it would definitely bring in a whole other source of income for them, as well as kind of boost people kind of go into that career of education as well. But it is a very, like, working with them is very, be a constant, like, consumer of products. To an extent of how many crops, how many trees, how many waste are we having to burn a day to fuel a city or Portland or Seattle.
So my two questions on that, first of all, is it, or, like, does it smell good? Because I feel like that can be something like, say you're burning it, even like 50 miles outside, like maybe a city like Portland, would people be complaining about that and be against it? Because I don't know, and part two of that, is it clean, like it's renewable, but is it, are we gonna have like, an effect, like global warming going on? Is it like producing all the
I
carbon?
was reading on it, so it was pretty clean.
Really? Okay.
Because when it comes to running machines, running steam power, it's just creating fuel, basically gas, to pump engines that burn.
Yeah, and also just like plants use to produce the biomass, we just put it, so it's
So do you guys think that this should be more or less? I think this was like 1% or smaller than 1% of what you guys think should be.
For me, this is my favorite option on the list, I think maybe this is hydro. That's a access to ocean lakes, these are ocean rivers. So I think this might potential for a more rural area as well, especially if you get more into the Midwest and even in the western side. The western side, there's a lot more agricultural land areas that have high access to that. It seems like every state for the most part has some sort of area that has agriculture. Even California,
Yeah, if you want to talk about hydro, it's very similar with how it's with water.
So that was
well, hydro is very common. And why I say like I think we definitely need a mix because big cities rely heavily on big cities.
So,
And we do very easy.
yeah, with hydro, like, does that affect like wildlife? Does that also affect like recreation?
Especially more than the sectors.
So since there's no two major options, so is there a consensus on which one? I mean, so it's just like all the three that should be the next, right? Yeah, but is there one that should be like a majority of plurality of the power of the United States? Like, what would you guys prefer in the United States? So,
I guess right now, in the population, we don't like change. So no matter like if we don't like change or not, we're gonna see consistency from what we do. Like, these political we have, maybe if we like live in the anything where it's already used. But hopefully we can get more biomass so that like it's nothing there. But kind of seeing it, it's like with this, we rather keep everything constant than actually find it better.
anything else to add? Maybe I'll vote for
Well, like you were saying about hydro before, there does seem to, it change, it can change quite a few things. When we were building Grandfield Dam, some towns were wiped out. But in the long run, it produces a good chunk of like states like this. Every day, every time you turn on the radio, there's always one ad, stay away, if you're in a boat, stay away from the dam. You have to run those ads.
After the solar, it's actually been pretty popular back where I was young because a lot of stock wells, before that you really had to have a generator to run those wells. And that costs a lot of money fuel for it. Some people also use that one, to run with that also. We don't always get a lot of it. But with solar, we get hardly any costs for that. Pretty convenient. Growing popularity.
Anything else you all want to add? Good thing. Awesome. Great job for our final study circle. All right, thank you all so much for sharing. There's a couple key things that really stood out to me that I think really connect with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about so far in class. One of the things that really stuck out to me is that this essentially fits under multi-issue bargaining. There was a point raised in the middle of the study circle where somebody says, you know, biomass, you were mentioning, I really like this one, you know, and there's a way that somebody can say, of these options available, of all these different sources of energy, this is the one that stood out to me, this is the one that I'm excited about. Or, you know, maybe somebody says, hey, nuclear energy, this is the one I really don't like. So when we're thinking about multi-issue bargaining, like we're trying to figure out which renewable source or non-renewable source to use of all these options, people get to stake out, this one is really important to me, I want this one, I really don't want this one, kind of indifferent. So it's a really interesting way for us to start to map out and think through people's preferences by surveying their overall thoughts and getting the chance for people to share their preferences too. I also think this study circle is a really good example of the way that context and experience impacts how people are viewing an issue in conflict. So for instance here, people were talking about, hey, you know, I don't really like solar, I don't really like wind. People were talking about, for instance, you know, I'm in a location where this form of energy is harmful to my community, or this doesn't seem like a good fit here, right? So things like context and location, I think, are shaping people's opinions about these sources of energy in a way that you wouldn't get if you didn't have the experience of getting to know and understanding where somebody is coming from there. So if you're a big fan of wind energy and somebody says, oh, I don't like wind at all, you might like recoil and be, what? Why don't you like wind? But then when you understand and start to unpack the reasons or the, you know, the experience that they personally have with that form, I think getting at the role of location was a really useful way to better understand people's perspectives. I like that this was kind of a distilling down of the topic into, hey, location and context matters, and there's also this sort of like resignation that things are not necessarily going to change a whole lot. But I like the way that it was able to boil down, even though it wasn't super like argumentative, right? It was a good way to understand the topic and where people were coming from. I also really like the way that the study circle was facilitated and the way that like you kind of jumped through the different topics. I also like the way that you started with like some factual information and context about each of the topics to help the group chat about that more, especially if they're not as familiar. A tactic that's used in a lot of like conflict management or study circles, in a lot of practical like situations, employment, you know, if you're working for a company that does something like this, right, is they're going to have people pose questions where you're sort of asked to get a reaction or thought on the spot without a whole lot of like direct context or knowledge ahead of time. So I really like that as a way to get people thinking, okay, here's some facts about nuclear energy, what do you think? And people's reactions can really reveal a lot and help us to sort of reach an overall conclusion on these topics too. Some ways to even continue to think about, you know, if this were like a larger discussion and had more time, one tactic that could have been used too would be like have each person write down their like ratio or percentage or like a pie chart of where they want to see the energy distributed, and then have people talk together after that. Obviously there was limited time, but like in a larger setting, that would be an interesting way to talk about those things, right? So, you know, one thing to continue to think about is ways to reduce groupthink to manage some of those challenges. Because if you ask a group to pose their opinions or perspectives in the beginning, oftentimes it'll prevent people from like modifying their original position later. It lets people sort of establish where they're coming from sooner so that they can create that kind of discussion. I really liked, again, not only the way the discussion was facilitated, but the way that people were participating, bringing in their perspectives and experiences of these forms of energy. And I think, again, context provides a way for us to understand why we disagree on a lot of things. And taking the time to listen from where people are coming from, I think does a whole lot to help us better understand positions on these and other issues. So really good job here. So that wraps up our study circles. I really enjoyed these. Make sure to turn in your reflection within 2 weeks of today if you were presenting today. And remember that the feedback on other study circles is due by the end of the quarter. So we will meet again next week, getting into a new topic. So we'll be getting into some of that new stuff for next week. Let me know if you have any questions related to your